Hi, welcome to The Musical Drummer, the channel where we help you sound like you and nobody else. Today, this episode, we're going to be talking about the drum set, about your drum set, my drum set, why our drum sets are set up the way they are, where that comes from, and how that might be limiting the choices we can make, and how it might be telling us what to play instead of us playing from the heart, right? And we're also going to be looking at how we might break out of that mold. So, hope that sounds interesting to you. If it does, make sure you hit the like, subscribe button, and hit the notification bell. That'll help other people find this channel. And also leave a comment, which will help me know whether or not I'm making any sense at all. Which, who knows, right? So, I'm glad you're here. My name is Mark. Come on in. All right, so we're going to be talking about the drum set, right? And I'd be willing to bet a fair amount of money that your drum set looks remarkably like my drum set and like everybody else's drum set. We know what a drum set is, right? It is a group of drums, a bass drum on the floor, played with your dominant foot, hi-hat played with the other foot, snare drum in the middle, tom-tom set up beyond the snare drum, and floor toms over to one side. And maybe you might have variations on this, more or fewer toms. You might have a floor tom on your left-hand side or a second snare drum or something. But that's the basic drum set, right? With variations of how many drums you have and where else they might be located. And that's certainly what you see. You know, look at any drummer playing, go to any music store, that's a drum set. It's like a definition, right? What does a guitar look like? Has a neck, 6 strings, a body more or less shaped like that. If it's electric, it has pickups on it. Electric guitar, drum set, that's what the instrument is. But that's not particularly useful to us with this channel, because the idea here is we want you to sound like you and nobody else, which means that any idea from somebody else, by definition, is not your idea. You're doing something because that's the way it's done. You're doing something because that's the way everybody else does it, right? Not much room for you in there. So, and this video is part of a whole series we're going to be doing on thinking outside the box. And the one foundational rule of thinking outside the box, the first thing you have to do is determine where the walls of the box are. And that is not always easy or obvious. It's like a goldfish being aware of water, right? It's almost impossible. And those walls of those boxes are there, and they are keeping us inside. You know, all the options we have to play are inside this box. One part of the walls of the box is our instrument, our drum set, and how it's set up. Let me explain what I mean. Let's talk about where the drum set came from, where this arrangement of drums came from. And where it came from is the combination of 2 different musical traditions. One of those is marching bands. And in a marching band, you have the bass drum playing usually 4 on the floor, and 4 on the chest, and a snare drum playing off beats or some little filigrees to complement the rest of the music, right? And give it that jaunty feel that a march needs to have. And the reason that it's that way is because bass drum playing 4 on the floor, because that's where you're marching. That's your feet. The bass, you march, move your feet to the bass drum. So that's one tradition. The other tradition is West African music, and I'm specifying West Africa because the continent of Africa has many, many different musical traditions, and not all of them sound anything at all like what we think of as African drumming. That's mostly West African. And the reason we think of that as African drumming is because West Africa is where, by and large, where the slaves came from that were brought to the United States and South America. And so when they were brought here, they had that musical background of theirs, which is always, not always, but the vast majority of West African music has a triple feel in the music. Whether that's 3/4, 6 6/8 or 12/8 or some other variation, but always with that triple kind of feel to it. And those two, and the thing is, important to note here that from a historical standpoint, is that when slaves were brought here, they were not allowed to play their musical instruments. They weren't allowed to play their drums because the slave owners, use owners in quotes here, they didn't want the slaves getting any kind of cultural cohesion, and the drums would have provided that. And so they were deliberately not allowed to play their drums. The one place where they could was in New Orleans in Congo Square. And that is the place where those drumming traditions from West Africa were kept alive. And so when you had that, and then here comes marching music, bam, they run into each other and they make this soup. And out of that came jazz. And in New Orleans, there's this brass band tradition that's still alive today, quite alive, amazingly wonderful bands. And they're marching bands, but they play marches with that New Orleans feel, that African triple feel. And like any marching band, they have a guy playing the bass drum, somebody else playing a snare drum, and the cymbals usually on top of the bass drum. And at some point back then, somebody decided, you know what, we could save a little money if we didn't have to pay two drummers, we could just pay one. And as jazz started to develop as an indoor kind of music, where a drummer didn't have to be marching, because you can't play snare drum and a bass drum while you're marching, at least not very easily. But once indoor jazz started to develop, the drummer could sit down, and that meant the drummer could play both the bass drum and the snare drum and the cymbal. And if he's playing the snare drum with his hands, then the foot is the logical place for the bass drum. And what came with that was that marching tradition. So the bass drum still, you listen to early jazz, and the bass drum's almost always playing 4 on the floor. And he's playing the quarter notes, and the snare drum is playing the offbeats and doing the more filigree kind of stuff. And you can hear it. Early jazz sounds like march music that's been, kind of stewed with West African drumming, and out comes this. And out of jazz, eventually, country music and blues and jazz all kind of have a head-on collision, and out comes rock and roll. And rock and roll still, especially listen to early rock and roll, is still either playing 4 on the floor, all the quarter notes, or just playing the 1 and the 3, and the snare drum playing the 2 and the 4. But it's still coming from that. It's that same marching band tradition just carried forward to be what we think of now as more current music. And of course, current popular music doesn't sound much like early rock and roll, but the tradition still comes through there. So why are we talking about that? Why do you care about the history? I mean, you should care about history, because if you don't know where you come from, how are you going to figure out where you're going? But still, this is not purely a history lesson. I'm bringing this all up because the music and the way it developed determined what the drum set was set up like. And the drum set itself, because it was designed to play that music, it also dictates to some degree what your choices are when you're playing music. You think, if you're like me, you think of the drum set, the bass drum is playing the downbeat, and whatever else might be 4 on the floor, it might be some other pattern, and of course these days it might be something a lot more rhythmically tricky, but it's still the basic idea. Bass drum is the foundation, snare drum is playing the offbeats or the backbeat or some kind of lighter, faster stuff up above, and then the cymbals are there for accents for the most part. Just like a marching band. Still, some variation of that is still in the music today. So this is why we're talking about it, because the drum set itself was designed to play that music, and because it was designed to play that music, it dictates to you. You grew up thinking this is a drum set, that's what music is. You listen to popular music, play a drum set, those things go together, all your choices are based on that. So the drum set, to some degree, is telling you what to play. And as we said at the beginning, you don't want to have somebody else telling you what to play. You want to be genuine. You want to be authentic. You want to be original in your approach to the drums. And that's hard to do if you're playing the same thing everybody else is playing, and if the instrument you're playing is telling you how to approach the music. That's a limitation. So, and the thing is, it's important to remember that in music in other parts of the world is quite different. And in South America, right? Listen to samba music and that low, what's the equivalent of the bass drum, the surdo in samba music. That is not playing the downbeat, that's playing the offbeats. That's playing what we would think of as the backbeat. And there's no drum playing that downbeat kind of feel. That's part of what gives samba music its lilt and its life, and it just makes it so compelling. That and the fact that the way you approach the equivalent of the snare drum in samba music has a lurchy, lopey kind of feel to it. It's not square. But the same thing with reggae music. At least the classic reggae music, the bass drum's often playing the offbeats, and that's why reggae has a different feel. So here's something for you to do. In your next practice, try swapping the bass drum and the hi-hat. So you're playing the bass drum, if you're right-handed, you're playing the bass drum with your left foot and the hi-hat with your right foot. And then just play like you would normally play. And see what that does to the feel of what you're playing. Try playing the bass drum part on the snare drum and the snare drum part on the bass drum. See how that feels. And if you want to really hear somebody who's sort of a master of this and just a general percussive genius, listen to Jim Keltner play, and particularly the stuff he's done with Ry Cooder. And you'll hear on a lot of songs, the bass drum is not playing what you expect it to play. It's appearing in other places. And the snare drum's not necessarily playing the backbeat. But he's playing a song that if you or I sat down to play that song, we would play it with a standard kind of a beat. And it would probably sound fine. But the way he's playing it, that song still works beautifully. But he's playing something completely different than what you or I would play. And it gives that song just a slightly different lift. It's like if you're playing a straight, a Billie Jean intro beat. If you start accenting the offbeats on the hi-hat instead of playing them all evenly, accent the offbeats. You're playing the exact same notes, the exact same part to the exact same song, but it will feel totally different. It have a completely different feel. And it might be a better feel, or might not. I mean, Billie Jean did pretty well for itself, but but you see what I mean? It's like when we start to think about playing the drums in a different place, whether they're physically in a different place or just in our mind, thinking of them in a different way, that the bass drum isn't necessarily playing the quarter notes. It's not necessarily playing the downbeat. The snare drum's not necessarily playing the backbeat. Something else might be doing that. When you start making those kinds of shifts, the song you're playing will have a different feel. It's the same song, and the thing is, any given song can have several different sort of rhythmic feels to it. And they will all work, and without doing too much harm to the song. I mean, usually a song has one feel that's really the best. But you can play all kinds of feels to it, just what Jim Keltner does. So that's your assignment here, is to, next time you're practicing, swap your drums around. And if you don't want to do that or can't do that for some reason, do it in your head. Think about play upside down, right? Play what you would normally play with your feet, play with your hands. What you would normally play with your hands, play with your feet. And see how that changes. And you'll just see, here's some new feel that you can use. So, am I saying you should change the way your drums are set up, on a permanent basis to go out and play? No, not necessarily. I mean, that's fine too. And this is sort of the point of all these videos, The goal is to having you think for yourself, having your playing come out of a place of your own genuine experience, unaffected by anybody else's ideas. And if you can achieve that most easily by, if you're feeling your sense of how the drums should fit to songs means that your drums should be in a different arrangement, put them in a different arrangement. If it doesn't, if playing in the standard arrangement is easier for you physically, which it may very well be, it is for me, but you can think in your head of a different way of thinking about what each of these instruments, where it's supposed to be used in a rhythm, and how you can change that around. Explore that just as much as you can. Try a million different ways in your head or in your setup, and just see how many different kinds of rhythmic feels that generates. And do this with some, listen to some song while you're playing, play along with it, but change your sensibility about which drum is for which kind of a thing, and see how that changes the feel of the song. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised and maybe even amazed by all the options that are out there. So again, anything that has received wisdom, or it's how it's always been done, how it should be done, this is the way everybody does it, anything that has any kind of sense of those ideas is something you want to get away from. It wants to be your idea of what you think everything should sound like and how it should come across. So I hope that's helpful. If it is, I hope you'll like the video and hit the subscribe and notification bell. And please do leave me comments down below if you think it's great stuff. That's helpful to hear. I know I'm on the right track. If it's confusing or you think I've got the wrong end of the stick, tell me that too, because that can help me make these things more effective. I'm doing this for you. And I want you to get everything out of it you can get. And the best way for me to do that is if you tell me what's working and what's not working. That'd be so great. Thanks very much, and we'll see you next time.